Well, hi, I'm Rosebean and I like to draw, and I've had two fandoms on my mind for a hot minute now, that being Honkai Star Rail and Pokemon. So let's make a video out of it. I'll be making Pokemon based on Honkai Star Rail characters and seeing where it takes me. This first Pokemon is based off of Dan Heng, so naturally it's gonna be a little dragon guy, because obviously he's a little dragon. Couldn't tell? Well, that's because he's technically a dragon in disguise who doesn't know he's a dragon right now. It's really complicated. So this little guy is obviously based on Chinese dragons, but a slightly incomplete one, because in most folklore or ancient drawings of Chinese dragons, they had 4 legs, 2 in the back, 2 in the front, but this guy only has 2 in the front. But that will change very soon. But enough about the future, because let's talk about the here and now. So this little guy obviously has teals to reference Dan Heng's original outfit, which has lots of teals. I ended up not giving this Pokemon ears for a kind of silly reason, because originally I thought Dan Heng was deaf because his earring kinda looked like a hearing aid, but it turned out fine in the end, so it's not that big of a deal. I ended up naming this Pokemon Danver, based on the words Dan Heng and also version. Speaking of versions, this is one of the evolutions you can get from Danver, which is Dan Heng's version of Invibrator Lunae, aka Dan Feng. Try saying all of that without a script. But anyway, I didn't mention this in the first section, but Danver is a pure dragon type, but this Pokemon is a dragon water type, and this Pokemon's name is Lotebane, which comes from the word lotus, because Invibrator Lunae, aka Dan Feng, which influenced both the name and design. Speaking of the design, now that this Pokemon has evolved, it actually has all 4 legs. Yippee! But now its tail is a little bit longer and its underbelly is pink instead of light blue. That, combined with the sharper edges, kind of gives the look of the petals of the lotus flower, but I don't know if that's conveyed super well. I do feel like I could have added a bit more detail to this Pokemon, but it is technically a second stage of an evolution, and it's not super powerful, and also I needed to get this video out this week, so we're gonna be skipping some details. Speaking of tails, the tail of this Pokemon still has that fluff at the end, which is supposed to represent Invibrator Lunae, aka Dan Feng's hair. Oh, glorious day, my cat has jumped on my lap and she is being so cute right now. Anyways, I think the only way you could get this Pokemon is through trade evolution, where you trade it while it's holding what's called a bag o' lotus. Yes, I did make that up. And finally, the third version of Dan Heng, Professor Terrier, or Terra, I don't know. My mind is turning to soup because there's so many forms, when will they end? But this final Pokemon in this evolution line is called Terrain, as in Terra and Shine. Similar to the last Pokemon, the only way you can get this one is if you also have a Danver and then you trade it while it's holding a pot o' soil. Which, yes, is another thing that I made up. Aside from adding copious amounts of gold to this design, I really wanted to emphasize the tail. That's because Professor Terrier is the only Dan Heng version who actually has his tail. I also wanted to emphasize the claws and make them seem like they could be good at digging, because Professor Terrier has something to do with the ground, but for the life of me I cannot remember what it is. So, to make a long story short, Terrain is ground dragon type. Next up is a Pokemon line based on Huohuo, because I love the Shenzhou Lafu. So this sopping wet cat turned Foxian is now turned Pokemon, because Huohuo, I thought, what if you got a little guy that just lost its tail, just like Huohuo did, and then you slap on some eye bags and some fluffy ears, and you basically have a Pokemon. This Pokemon is called Ipuo. First half of the name being Eep as in Eepy, aka Sleepy, and the second half being Huo as in Huohuo. Now, if you get your Ipuo to level 20, you will find that it has a little companion now. This companion represents Mr. Tail, aka Huohuo's tail that's not her tail because it's a spirit pretending to be her tail. Instead of going for a more fiery style for the tail, I tried to keep more of the Pokemon inspiration and made it a bit more wispy and less flame-like. An interesting thing I accidentally ended up doing is I tried to make it look like the little spirit has ears, but it kinda also looks like really big horns. So it's kind of up to your interpretation of it to see what you want to see. Now, this Pokemon is called Drowhua. Drow is a very soft and somber word, and I don't really know if it means anything, but obviously Huo is the same because of Huohua. As a finishing touch, I made this little wisp guy as spooky as I possibly could by giving it some cool, haunted-looking eyes. Now for the final evolution, if you manage to get your Drowhua up to level 30, it will evolve into a Haunthua. Now, you may be wondering, Miss Bean, where is the tail, or rather the ghost that's pretending to be Huohuo's tail? Well, Miss Bean was my mother. You can just call me Rose. But besides the point, here is the tail. It has become a spirit that is not necessarily possessing, but definitely empowering this small creature. And that's where the haunt part of Haunthua comes into play. Originally, I just wanted to keep Ipuo the same and just add the tail and then make the tail bigger, but I think it's cool that I made the actual Pokemon part slightly bigger and slightly more developed throughout each evolution. I think it would be really cool if this was an actual Pokemon and you tried to pet it. Your hand wouldn't just fall through the ghost. You would pet the ghost and then pet actual Haunthwa's head. This next Pokemon I love so dearly because he is based off of my favorite character, that being Boothil. I ended up naming this Pokemon Clatterhill because I mixed the words clatter and Boothil, but when you say it together, it kind of sounds like the word collateral. The main idea behind this was, what if I made a humanoid Pokemon, but it was entirely made out of metal? The one thing I knew I had to do with this design was at the end of his feet, if you could call them feet, I gave him little sharp spikes, which are meant to both invoke spurs but also heels, because Boothil is one of the only male characters to have an actual heel on his shoes. This is because a lot of cowboys had a bit of a heel on their shoes, so that way they could easily jump onto horses while also being more secure in the saddles. Also, it's a reference to his basic attack because he just straight up kicks you, and you would not want to be kicked by that thing's foot. I also wanted to include many scars, if you could call them scars, metal damage, across this entire Pokemon's body to show that this thing is reckless and it wants to fight you. I also made it that its legs aren't entirely human-like, because I feel like if I just gave him regular human anatomy legs, it would look too weird and not really Pokemon-like, but with the legs that have the ball joint and the knee is slightly set more forward, I think it looks animalistic enough. When it came to the face, I made both the white part of the eye and the teeth the same shade of gray, because I thought it would look a little weird and like, is the same material used for the eye as it is used for the teeth, and also make it seem like it's just a mask placed over a bigger part of that same light gray. And of course, it's a robot cowboy, and what is a robot cowboy without a cute little hat and a cute little vest? Oh, Clatterhill, how I wish you were a real Pokemon. I would love you till the end of eternity. A keen-eyed viewer may notice that that character in the corner is not a Honkai Star Rail character, at least not a real one. Well, that's because she's my OC and I love her, so we're making a Pokemon out of her. So when my OC was born, her legal name was Satu, because it's a Finnish name and she's half Finnish. So this Pokemon is called Satatter. I think you can guess the origin of the name. Satu is an amputee, and I wanted to convey that within this Pokemon without making it look horrific. So I thought, what if it was a torn-up plushie? For the design, I wanted to stick with very dull, muted colors, except for the only bright pop of color, which is the yellow of its button eye. Now, an important part of her story is that she eventually gets adopted by Boothill. Now, I may be thinking, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has something very important to do with this next Pokemon, because this is Bandscrap. And you can only get Bandscrap if you have a Clatterhill in your party while it levels up. So this silly little plushie takes the spare parts of Clatterhill and uses it to make its own horrifying legs. Satu was given the nickname Bandit, and it stuck with her so much that eventually people forgot her original name. So that's where the band part of Bandscrap comes from. I really like how her legs in the back are just completely humanoid and so creepy compared to the rest of her plush lamb body. And now, instead of having buttons for eyes, her eyes are crosshairs. And with Bandscrap, that is the final character turned into a Pokemon. Don't forget to stay safe, drink water, and thank you for watching.